I looked after my friend's grandkids, but I got tired, so I'm gonna leave them with you. Think of it as practice, practice. Despite being put on strict bed rest due to a threatened preterm birth, my mother-in-law thrust 3 kids upon me, claiming they're her friend's grandchildren, and began to nap on the sofa. The kids run around the house non-stop, not listening even when I call out to them. In my desperation, I called my husband at work for help. However, he merely responded, "They're family, so you gotta help out your mom," pushing me aside. Out of sheer desperation, I made another call. And as a result, karma caught up with my mother-in-law. My name is Jessica. I got married to Mike, whom I met through a mutual friend, and am currently expecting our first child. Mike works for the company that his father, Bob, runs, and we live in an apartment near Mike's parents' home. There were discussions about living together when we got married, but Bob suggested that I might feel more comfortable if we had our space. However, since we moved just a 10-minute walk away from my in-laws, my mother-in-law, Susan, started visiting us quite often. Being a sociable person with numerous activities and classes, Susan initially seemed to be trying to bond with me. Stopping by after a walk or shopping and having a short chat was manageable, even if it happened a few times a week. But gradually, her visits became longer, often requiring her to step inside our house. Recently, this has become the norm. Having her over means preparing tea and snacks, and I can't relax or neglect the household chores. Though Susan says, "Make yourself comfortable," it's not that simple. Her visits began to feel like a burden. But I still wanted to maintain a good relationship. It was tough for me to ask her to visit less often. I hoped Mike would speak to Susan, but when I approached him, he merely said that there's no need to be formal with family. He even suggested I learn cooking and household chores from Susan, indirectly expressing his dissatisfaction with me, which was disheartening. There were times I thought it might have been better if we lived together. But that would mean enduring Susan's never-ending stories daily, which were frankly exhausting. Susan doesn't really have any substantial content in her stories. They're often about topics she saw on TV or friends of hers that I don't know. She just talks non-stop. Bob doesn't listen to her, so I guess that's why she comes to my place, hoping for someone to listen. Now that I think about it, even Mike never really paid attention to Susan's stories. Any attentive listener would do for Susan. Proof of that is when she has her social club meetings and can chat to her heart's content, she doesn't come to my place. One day, as I was thinking of ways to reduce Susan's visiting hours, I discovered I was pregnant. Being my first pregnancy, I wanted to find the right timing to tell everyone. However, upon hearing the news, Mike, perhaps too overjoyed, immediately informed Susan and Bob. I appreciate their happiness for us, but I haven't even reached the stable phase of my pregnancy yet. Mike suggested I could get some advice from Susan. He even asked her to check up on me, leading to her visiting even more frequently, sometimes staying for lunch or even dinner. Bob is the only one who seems concerned about my condition, whereas Mike and Susan just keep saying that moving around would help with an easier delivery. They don't help around the house at all. When morning sickness hit harder than I expected and I wanted to lie down, Susan would still come over and meddle with household matters. Maybe it was the stress of those days, but during a routine checkup, I was diagnosed with a risk of preterm birth and was told to rest. The doctor advised me to get support from my family for household chores, but I wasn't sure if that was feasible given the current circumstances. But considering the baby, I knew I couldn't just keep quiet. I decided to talk to Mike as soon as he gets home, ask him to help with chores, and stop Susan's frequent visits. I was hopeful that Mike would understand. But as soon as I laid down on my bed, the doorbell rang repeatedly. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and considering the incessant ringing, I instantly knew it was Susan. She probably knew about my doctor's appointment and timed her visit accordingly. I had just been told to rest. And even if I could stay in bed, with Susan's incessant talking, I wouldn't get any rest. So, I decided to pretend I wasn't home. After ringing the bell for a while and getting no response, Susan finally seemed to give up. Feeling a bit guilty, I closed my eyes hoping to get some sleep. However, to my surprise, I heard Susan's voice inside the house saying, Are you here? I heard footsteps approaching, and suddenly my bedroom door opened. There you are. Why are you in bed in the middle of the day? I had locked the front door, but somehow, Susan was inside. Susan, how did you? Looking puzzled, she flashed a key in front of me. It was a spare key to our house, and it seemed Mike had given it to her without my knowledge. I had repeatedly asked Mike to tell Susan to limit her visits, and I was infuriated to learn that he'd given her a spare key instead. Unfazed, Susan continued to criticize, mentioning how dusty my room was. I informed her of my risk of preterm birth as told by the doctor. I need to rest, so I can't entertain you today. I'll be in bed, I said, hinting that she should leave. But she didn't take the hint and showed no signs of concern. She proceeded to open a window and called out, "Come on in." After that, I heard loud footsteps, and 3 energetic boys I'd never seen before appeared. They were 3 energetic young boys. They all looked somewhat similar, suggesting they might be brothers. While they didn't enter the room immediately, they peeked in from the doorway. I'm babysitting my friend's grandkids, but handling all 3 is quite tiring. I'll take a nap in the living room. You can put them to sleep here. It's a good practice for when you have your child, Susan said nonchalantly. With that, she told the kids to nap with me and swiftly moved to the living room. The boys, interpreting this as permission to enter, rushed into my bedroom. In no time, my bedroom, with only a bed for Mike and me, turned into a playground. The boys showed no intention of napping and began jumping on the bed and playing tag. No matter how much I tried to calm them, they were engrossed in their play. In this chaotic situation, I decided to call Mike for help. I called his work phone and explained the situation, asking him to come home as soon as possible. Mike, the doctor said I'm at risk of preterm birth and told me to rest. But these kids are running around nonstop. Can you please come home? I was genuinely scared at that moment. The kids' actions were becoming more boisterous, and I feared one might accidentally bump into me. I was on the verge of tears, dreading any potential harm to my unborn child. However, even as I pleaded with Mike in a tearful voice, he seemed not to grasp my fear. You can't expect me to just come home, he said in exasperation. Mom's been handling those energetic kids and she's tired. Why don't you help out? Think of it as parenting practice. Shockingly, Mike echoed Susan's sentiment and hung up the phone. Despite my repeated attempts to call him back, he didn't answer, and the children began trying to jump from Mike's bed to mine. I faced the kids and couldn't help but blurt out, "Stop!" in a loud voice. The children looked at me with surprised expressions, and while they did stop their bed-jumping antics, they continued to chase each other around the room. How long were these kids going to be here? When would Susan ever wake up from her nap? Feeling helpless, I clutched my smartphone in despair. It was then that I spotted a certain name on the screen, and in my desperation, I called that person. By the time Susan finally woke up, it was already late in the afternoon. I guess I overslept. I was exhausted from playing with the kids. She yawned and got up to find the kids. But the previously noisy kids were now silent. Susan peeked into the bedroom where she last saw the children, but no one was there. When she finally made her way to the kitchen, she was in for another shock. The 3 children were quietly sitting at the dining table, munching on snacks. Lying on the couch, watching over them, was me, and standing next to me was Bob's sister, Kate. You finally woke up, said Kate when she noticed Susan's entrance. Indeed, in my desperation, the person I'd turned to was Kate. Living just an hour's drive away, she came immediately after I called her. Since the wedding, Kate had taken a special liking to me. Apparently, Kate had always wanted a daughter, but never had children of her own. She seemingly saw me, her nephew's wife, as the daughter she never had. When I shared the news of my pregnancy, Kate, having been a nurse and having worked in pediatrics for a long time, reassured me, saying, "If you ever need help or advice, don't hesitate to reach out." Never did I expect that challenge to involve Susan, but Kate, without a hint of annoyance, had come to help. The children, who had been running around non-stop, immediately calmed down upon Kate's arrival and soon took their afternoon naps. Exhausted from their playtime and under Kate's guidance, they drifted off quickly. The children had been playing non-stop and were undoubtedly exhausted. In the silence of the room, where only the soft breathing of the sleeping kids could be heard, I finally let out a sigh of relief. After the kids took their nap, I filled Kate in on everything that had transpired. First, Kate expressed concern for my well-being, then she promised to talk to Susan as well.
"From now on, you just focus on the baby in your belly and take care of yourself,"
Kate advised. Her words reassured me, and I opened up about my anxieties and what I foresaw in the future. After chatting with Kate for a while, the kids began to stir from their nap. Kate then explained to the children that I was expecting, encouraging them to be gentle and understanding. As I had suspected, the kids were siblings. The two older brothers remembered their mom being pregnant with their youngest brother and were compassionate towards me. The youngest, following his elder sibling's example, tried his best to be considerate. I realized these were genuinely kind-hearted kids, and it warmed my heart. I apologized for raising my voice earlier, and the children apologized for running around and jumping on the bed. We all made up. As we all sat down for snacks and began cleaning up, Susan finally woke up from her nap and came looking for the kids. Despite her surprise at seeing Kate, Susan started making excuses. According to her, she had brought the kids to my home to give me some practice in child rearing. She assumed that since the kids were tired from playing, even someone inexperienced like me would be able to put them to bed with ease. Hence, she had taken her nap first. "I can't believe you called Kate. I didn't think you'd be so overwhelmed by the kids," Susan remarked, implying that the fault lay with me. But since I had already confided everything to Kate, Susan's excuses only exasperated her. I was too flabbergasted to even counter Susan's claims. Oblivious to our disbelief, Susan kept rambling with her justifications until a call from a friend interrupted her. Apparently, the friend, expecting the kids at Susan's house and finding it empty, had called in confusion. Naturally, this friend and I had never met, so the idea that the kids were at a stranger's home never crossed her mind. Once informed by Susan, the friend hurriedly made her way to my house. Upon seeing her grandchildren safe and sound, she visibly relaxed and then apologized to me. She even noticed my pregnancy at a glance and promised to visit again with another apology. The children waved at Kate and me with a hint of reluctance as they left. Although the situation had felt threatening at one point, thanks to Kate, I felt we ended up spending a delightful time with the kids. As we bid farewell to the children, Susan sneakily tried to leave too. However, Kate stopped her and explained the potential risks and dangers of my condition. "There's even a chance she might lose the baby," Kate told Susan sternly, but Susan's only response was, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Despite her friend's apparent frustration at Susan's reckless behavior, Susan showed no signs of remorse. Amidst all this, Bob and Mike returned home. It seemed Kate had informed Bob about my condition, prompting him to wrap up his work early and bring Mike home.
"I'm sorry we're late. Jessica, are you feeling okay?"
Bob inquired, genuine concern evident in his voice. However, Mike appeared discontented, probably still underestimating the seriousness of my condition. Mike hadn't been helpful with the housework since he learned about my pregnancy and the start of my morning sickness. In fact, when I was feeling especially sick and asked for his help, he would get very upset. He kept saying, "It's not an illness." If he still feels that way, I had no confidence in our ability to raise our child together in the future. Kate explained my condition to all three of them, emphasizing that I needed to rest right now. Before Mike could argue with his usual, "It's not an illness" retort, Bob declared he would take me back to my parents' home. Apparently, Bob had been cautioning Susan about her frequent visits to our home for a while. Susan had been claiming she was counseling me and helping with chores, but she hadn't done any of that. Bob had noticed this and was trying to figure out how to restrain her when today's incident occurred.
"You guys being around means Jessica can't rest properly. For the sake of the baby in her womb, going back home for the birth is the best decision."
Bob explained. Even after hearing this, Susan continued to repeat. That wasn't my intention. To make matters worse, Mike started to defend Susan, saying, Mom was just trying to help Jessica. He probably thought it'd be a good child-rearing practice. They seemed to get along well in the end, didn't they? The reason we ended up getting along with the kids was thanks to Kate. The thought of facing that situation alone still chills me to the bone, and I had lost trust in Mike, who didn't come to my aid when I called for help. Kate, acting on my behalf, packed my belongings and informed my parents that I would be returning home. Mike and Susan tried to stop me, but I ignored their pleas and got into Bob's car. Bob and Kate kindly drove me to my parents' home. Bob felt responsible for not being able to stop Susan, but I knew I could rely on him and Kate. I'll talk to Mike when we get home. I hope you two won't divorce, but it's your decision, Jessica. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. Bob kindly told me. I was so grateful for Bob's compassionate words. When we arrived at my parents' house, Kate briefed them about everything. Without passing any judgment about my future with Mike, they warmly welcomed me. When it was time to bid farewell to Bob and Kate, I expressed my wish for them to meet my child, regardless of whether I divorced Mike. After a few months, I safely gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. When the labor pains started, I didn't inform Mike. I had decided to let him know about the birth only after our child was safely delivered. Eventually, I contacted him and decided to return to our shared home. I had initially thought of divorcing him and raising the child alone, but when I saw my daughter's face, I realized she wouldn't exist without him. Naturally, I wanted him to meet her. On the day I was to return, Mike came to pick me up. When he saw our daughter outside my parents' house, he teared up and whispered, "Thank you." To me. Mike and I hadn't been in touch much while I was away, but he seemed to have changed. Our daughter instantly fell asleep in her car seat, allowing Mike and I to have a heart-to-heart talk. It seemed Kate had given Mike quite a stern talking to while I was gone, prompting him to reconsider his views. He hadn't realized how much a pregnancy can affect a woman's body and had dismissed my discomfort as mere exaggeration. Mike told me he had studied various books and prepared to welcome our daughter while waiting for me. Seeing our safely born daughter, he was overwhelmed with emotion and realized how dangerously he had treated me, expressing how scared it made him feel now. From now on, we'll be raising this little life that can't fend for itself yet. I was happy that Mike understood and shared that fear with me. Mike also informed me about Susan. After I returned to my parents' home, Susan was reprimanded by Kate, much like Mike had been. Given her past behavior, Bob was quite angry with Susan, too. Despite being scolded by both, all Susan said was, "I didn't mean it like that," showing no understanding of my condition whatsoever. Bob decided that if I ever came back, it would be dangerous if Susan approached, so he banned her from our home. Though Susan protested, with Mike's change of heart from Kate's words, she had no allies left. She had no choice but to accept the ban and return her spare key. Later, one of Susan's friends came to apologize. Upon learning I had moved back to my parents, she seemed deeply concerned, suspecting it might have been because of her grandchildren. It wasn't due to the kids, but because of Susan, as Mike clarified. Hearing that, and considering her grandchildren were brought to a stranger's house without her knowledge, she severed ties with Susan. Apparently, Susan met her friend through some shared activity, and now she couldn't even attend that after being ostracized. Despite this, Susan doesn't think she's at fault. She's been causing trouble with other friends, and both Mike and Bob feel they can't deal with her anymore. Dad might even divorce Mom, Mike mentioned. Recently, Bob has rarely been returning to his family home, and apparently, he's rented a place near our apartment. By the time the story about Susan ended, we arrived at our home. Bob and Kate were there to greet us. Seeing our daughter, still asleep, they smiled joyfully, which warmed my heart. Thanks to Mike and Bob, the house was even cleaner than when I had left for my parents. Mike planned to take paternity leave soon, based on Bob's suggestion. Though I hadn't informed Mike, my parents had mentioned that they'd occasionally visit to check on things. Kate had been keeping an eye on Mike since I went to my parents, but I'm sure he's going to be a good father and husband. I had started to trust Mike again. Though I had once feared for my safety, our daughter was born without any issues. Surrounded by trustworthy people like Mike, Bob, and Kate, I felt confident about raising her. We currently don't intend to let Susan into this circle. Without our permission, she won't be able to see her grandchild. It seems people are gradually distancing from Susan, but when will she realize this?